Right, hitting record. Welcome everybody to our last session. Can you believe it's been 7 already? Our last session of our conference for the Anthroposophical Society in Southern Africa. It's been a wonderful 7-week journey with all of you, and I'm so glad that we've got through this. Sad as well that it's coming to an end, but really glad to get to spend the evening with you. What we are going to be looking at tonight is we are going to, well, the tables are going to turn a bit. Noy has a few questions she wants to ask me. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Noy. And then after that, I'm going to ask Noy some more questions. We're going to be looking at the threefold, oh, I've gone blank. What's it?
Social order.
Threefold social order, that's it. Because at the same time, I've got people to admit. Right, so we're going to be looking at the threefold social order and in relation to the foundation stone. So that should be an interesting bit of a discussion. And then we're going to end off by asking you what you got from this series. What are your takeaways? What are your greatest highlights that you can share with others? So that's a bit about what we would like to share with you, and obviously open to the floor for you to also give us your contribution. So yes, we've been exploring the foundation stone over these last 7 weeks, and I think in a way of just summing up, I think I'm going to rather hand over to Noy and let her ask me the few questions that she has, and let the evening unfold.
Thank you, Telana. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So the first question is, how on earth did you discover anthroposophy?
It's always fun, hey, when your questions are asked back at you.
Yes.
I live in Johannesburg, for those that are not aware, and nearby is the Michael Mount Waldorf School that has an organic market. And that for about 7-8 years was my home on a Saturday morning. It was the place that we all met, my friends and I, and we just used to have the most amazing discussions and eat and drink and have a really merry morning at the market. And because I frequented it so much, I met a lot of people that also used to go to the market. And a gentleman, Paul Myberg, I know a lot of people also aware of him. He and I started chatting, and the more we spoke, the more questions I had for him, and the more questions I had, you know, the more he responded, the more I had questions for him. And eventually he said, I'm going to get you a book. And then the book took quite a while to arrive, and I was always asking him, where's the book? Where's the book? So I just was so hungry for information. And eventually he taught me about patience, especially when it comes to spiritual journey. He really got that message through to me, to just take my time. And he took me through to the library at the Steiner Center at the Bryanston Market, or Bryanston School there. And there I met Jane, who I think is also on here tonight. And Jane had ordered the Knowledge of Higher Worlds for me. And that was my introduction. So through all my questioning of Paul Myberg, who also has a strong background in anthroposophy, he got me into that book, and Jane let me know about reading groups. And from there, I joined Helen's reading group that I've been part of for many, many years, and very grateful for all the books that, I've got to learn about anthroposophy through. And that brings me up to now, where I actually work in that library a few mornings a week, and now the secretary of the society in Johannesburg. So that's how I got into or found anthroposophy.
Wow, that's quite a journey, Telana. Amazing journey. And when were you introduced to the foundation stone verse?
That was actually just before lockdown. And I think she's introduced a lot of people in Johannesburg. She introduced you as well. It's Ludmilla. Ludmilla decided to restart their group, or to resuscitate it again. It had, I think, gone quiet. And because now I've been part of, on the mailing list and coming to events, I heard of this and I think she gave a bit of an introductory talk at one of the other events. That was my first introduction to this foundation verse, because she's got her group going again, and that was so it's only about like 2 years ago.
And what was your first impression of this verse?
I think I wrote just the words down, very complex and very deep. Where's it here? Very deep and complex. And I remember, gentleman Anthony read it out, and he's got a very deep, wonderful voice. And it just, I think my first, thought was, this must be really important, because if there's been a study group for so many years, and now they're getting their group going again, and they meet every 3 weeks, on the go, that must be an important verse, because it just seemed like a poem at first, just a lovely, poem. But I think the more the more I listened to it, and then you heard people's discussions around it, it's really got to understand that there's a lot to it. It's more than just a pretty verse. But also it was, I think, a bit over my head at the time. I think I felt like a chore. I'm not quite sure what all these references are, but I knew there was something here. As a first impression, I knew it was important, and it was just a matter of time to uncover the importance.
Thank you.
Oh.
And now, having okay, still.
Just keep talking, it will come back to you.
Yes. Having listened to these various interviews over the last 6 weeks, maybe you've gained something unusual. Maybe you found special nuggets. How do you stand now towards the foundation stone, having met all of the people who've offered and shared over the past 6 weeks?
I think my first thought is I'm in awe. I am in awe of how you have spent decades, many of you, and the people we've interviewed, working just on one verse, and all the doors that it's opened up for you. So it's been a lot of that. It's been, I think, awe is just the first word. And then I thought, because I knew you were going to ask this kind of question, I started looking at what we've covered in all the weeks, and I thought it'd be maybe a good way to just summarize a bit, from what I've gained. So firstly, it was just, this all started because, Noy, you had the impulse to write a book, which I think I believe it's not even your first book around the verse. It's, you've written a few booklets around it. And then you asked who wants to contribute. And I said, well, I'll interview you about the book. And look, it's turned into this wonderful 7-week series of interviews. But I think in my discussions with you around it and setting this up, and that not only have I learned the significance of the verse, but I've also, I think, seen it almost in practice in the way we engage and the way we set this all up. But I know for you, you've said it was a very important verse in terms of just the society. So how does a collection of people work together in a way to achieve something that's beyond them? As well as, each person still being in their freedom as individuals. So that stood out for me, I think, from like our discussions and just reading the book and how it's brought all of us together, this verse. I mean, just look at, you've got 70 people registered for this and participating in some way. And then Martin and Christiana, I mean, wow, the history behind it. Really gained from Martin the significance of the verse in terms of the history of the foundation. I mean, the society, not the foundation, it's the foundation stone, but the significance of one, the stone in the building, and then the verse as being the foundation that all these people are now connected through and are standing on this foundation that the verse gives us, and that the verse is just, it encompasses everything in such a, you know, few amazing lines. So, and that even links to, I think, what Cyril was pointing out, how it was such a turning point in history. So from what I learned from him is how this verse is, Steiner somehow brought all the four streams together. I still know there's so much I need to learn there about all of that, but it's just the significance of this verse at the time it came and what it did for the evolution of the world, as well as just in the evolving of the actual society and all the people involved. And Christiana really helped me understand rhythms, because everyone's been talking about rhythms since I heard the foundation start, and I didn't understand what that was. So Christiana, thank you so much for really, I think it gave me an insight into eurythmy, as well as just the structure, the rhythms, and then the importance of how you say it, and noticing the feelings that it evokes, you know, the going out and the coming in terms of the actual wording is, you know, very important and useful. And then the healing aspect of it, that just by working with a verse, we are working on ourselves in very interesting ways and useful, important ways. And Estelle, as you brought so much history that I didn't even know about in terms of the society in South Africa. So it was really nice to be able to link to, because, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Cape Town, and to, you know, just to meet you, but also to understand the history, how involved and how much so many people did to create a place for anthroposophy to be, so that I could find it at the market down the road from my house. You know, it's amazing, I think, in a way. And I've actually since then taken out Salman's book from the library. So thanks to Estelle's encouragement and inspiration there. And I still want to know more about puppetry. So I think we will do a follow-up conversation with our puppets one day. Michael's always brought me, but I mean, in our other discussions, but really when we looked at the translation of the verse, how important language is, how important the words are, and which words were chosen, and where they are in the, you know, the structure of it. So I think it's important that we have different translations, and something I hope to do is slowly work through, maybe work with one to get a better sense of the verse, and then start looking at other translations, because that helps you understand the meaning, like what's intended behind the verse. And just understanding that even that journey is a meditation. I think it's really opened my eyes to what meditation is Michael's explanation in relation to the foundation stone and how we work with it, but also from when he was exploring knowledge of higher worlds with us. He also really made that point that meditation is not just sitting with your eyes closed or staring at a candle. There's a lot more to it. So, and biodynamic farming with Wendy, sure, just understanding how much more complex it is, but also seeing it as a system. I think from biodynamic, she talked about the farm as a being, you know, it's really been systemic, and I think we can see that in the verse as well. It's not just one aspect. There's a whole system that it explores, so many capacities. And what stood out for me as well is not only, you know, the points that she highlighted in the verse, but how she uses it in her day-to-day life on the farm. She would recite it as she's making some of the preparations, which are very rhythmical. And because there's so many rhythms in the day-to-day running of a farm, how that also is another aspect of rhythm that I got some understanding around. And Cyril, with just the macro, you know, the bigger view of how this verse fits into everything, and just his drawing as well. It was lovely to see a visual representation from something that, you know, that's just words, and all the other art that Cyril you shared with us. So thank you. It is and it's I think we were talking about, you know, my first sense that there was something deep and important about this verse is just really echoed in what Cyril shared with us about how it fits into a much bigger picture of the Earth evolution. And this verse is like a gateway for us. It's a way for us to access so much knowledge, because I can just see as the more I spend my next couple of decades working with this, as all of you have and inspired me to do, that each line, each verse will lead me down corridors and probably, you know, 10, 20 books of science. So yeah, I think that's like, you know, what I've gained from these few weeks is that this is not something you like a one book you read up and you put down. This is something that will evolve, and I can always refer to, and I can look at it many, many times through my exploration of learning about myself and my place in the world, and how anthroposophy can help me with that. So I think I'll pause there.
It was a marvelous vista of everything that's happened in the last 6 weeks. So thank you so much for this very comprehensive, shall we say, summary, because I think it will also lend itself to the end of our discussion this evening, where everyone who wishes to will share highlights or vignettes of their own experience. So thank you so much for that summary, which is very comprehensive and heartwarming, and it just totally makes, I'm sure it makes sense to you why we could spend 30 years on the one verse, and how every time you work with it, another door can open, or you can deepen something that you've already grasped in a certain way. So thank you so much for that. And two more questions. How could you imagine this verse fulfilling the needs of spiritually seeking people who haven't yet met anthroposophy from your own, because you're now a face of anthroposophy in Johannesburg. And so it's quite important, because there are many people there who could benefit from anthroposophy, probably, you would agree. So can you envisage your next step?
Yeah, I've been wondering what it is, because we spent months on this, you know, planning it and setting it up, and now it's time to move on to something else. But the one aspect is perhaps in a couple of months, I think I'd like to read a few books and just work with it on my own for a bit. I think I've got so much input, I need to almost digest everything, you know, that we've been speaking of. And I think through this journey, I must have about 4 books now that everyone's pointed me to. So I need to work through at least 1 or 2 of them, you know. So that would be my starting point, and maybe at some point to join Ludmila's group again. It's just, you know, fitting it in, but probably find a way to fit it in, because I think there's value in working with a group, because it's not only accountability, but it's the different perspectives, the different understandings, the different levels of working with the verse that everyone can bring to the parties and to answer questions and that. The other idea, and this is what I originally had thought that the series would be about, was when I interviewed you about your book, was going to be then asking, well, how do we work with it? And seeing if there's beginners, I call them beginners, people who are new to it, that want to start. Because I did go to some sessions with Ludmilla and them, and I felt overwhelmed. But I think this is definitely, the series helped me a lot to find my feet a bit more. So perhaps if there's, you know, an interest, we could look at a beginners group. So we start at the very, very beginning and see where that takes us. But it's more, I think your question was how I see myself working with it. It's almost like in parallel with whatever else I'm studying and working on, is always referring back to it. And I think a lot of you have said it does have an effect on you. So maybe when you're just feeling a bit like a wobbly, having a difficult time, it's a good thing to just spend a few quiet moments with, that it can just almost, I see it as probably recentering me in a way, even if I'm not fully aware of all the meanings in it. Just that starting, exploring it, seeing where it takes me.
Thank you.
I think that's, yeah.
And then one last final question, which you've asked all of us, so I'm going to offer you the same opportunity, is do you have a favorite line or a few lines that really strike you?
I thought someone was going to ask me this. So I have been looking at it over the last week, and I can't identify like a favorite. I think the more I looked at it and thought about it over the last few days, I think what has really struck me right now is the structure of the verse. I love that it's got, you know, 3 parts, and then the fourth part is different. But in each of those first 3 parts, there's repetition, but in a different way. So like the spirit recalling in the first verse, and then spirit awareness and spirit beholding, like those 3, they're like anchors that you can see in each of the sections of the verse. So that for me, I think is what stood up, you know, and stands out the most at this point in time. I would love to revisit this in a couple of decades or in a couple of years even, and see there if there's a verse that stands out more. But for me, it is more the structure of how it was written, because that for me is so complex and there's so much thought behind it, that it just shows, I don't know, just that there's so much behind it. To be able to structure something like that with all the different levels in it is really what has struck me the most about this special verse. Yeah.
So Telana, I'm just very grateful for your help, and I'd like to thank you for sharing your journey with us as well. And so shall I hand it back to you?
Yes. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity to also share. So there'll be time if anyone else wants to obviously ask me some more questions, but I think the time now is for us to explore this threefold nature, social order, threefold social orders. And maybe that's the question just to start off with, Noe, is what do we mean by this? I'm just looking for my notes here. Threefold social order, because I know you've mentioned it in the past and how it has a very practical aspect related to the foundation stone. So I wanted to start off by asking you just briefly, if you could maybe just for those of us that are new to the terminology, that, you know, listening to the recordings and that, just to put it in context, and then how it relates to what, you know, what you believe it does with relates to the foundation stone. And I am going to ask us all, because of time, what I understand about the threefold social order is that it's a big topic and it's very broad, and we can spend another 7 weeks just talking about it. So we're going to have to make sure we are succinct and to the point, and keep relating it just to our primary focus, which is the foundation stone. Otherwise, I think we'll go down rabbit holes. So just if everyone can just, with their comments when we open it up, just remember that. But Noel, Let's start with you, just to put it, because it was something that came out quite strongly from the discussion after our last session. So lead us into it, yeah.
Well, I think Martin, and maybe it was also Cyril, who said, don't forget the threefold social order when you're talking about the foundation stone. So I have a confession to make. I wouldn't say this in any other group, but I'm going to say it here. Whenever I hear those words, the threefold social order, my eyes glaze over. And I just think, oh gosh, no, have we got to, because I could never really understand it when these economists and people who started giving this long lecture, and I could never enter into it. And then one day I read Rudolf Steiner saying, Henry Ford is the most exquisitely incredible, intelligent man. And my ears pricked up and I thought, well, if Rudolf Steiner could say that about another human being, I want to read about him. So I ordered his book called My Life and Work. And you can get it off Loot probably. Oh, was it upside down? Sorry. There we go. So you can order that from Loot. But I just want to bring one main point, because I think that the threefolding, I know Grant has also spoken about this word threefold social order, and I'm hoping he might say something about the translation of that from the German. But when you hear Rudolf Steiner say that someone is incredibly intelligent, and and he said that if you met Henry Ford, he would beat you black and blue, trying to get to open the door of anthroposophy, which he couldn't do. And for me, that is a very big picture relating to this topic. So I've just got a short quotes from Henry Ford, My Life and Work, and then I'll pass it on back to you. He says here, I have to read it, the highest use of capital is not to make more money, but to make money do more service for the betterment of life. Unless we in our industries are helping to solve social problems, we are not doing our principal work. We have no place for non-working stockholders. The working stockholder is more anxious to increase his opportunity to serve than his bank dividends. So that's one little picture. Now, capital that a business makes for itself, that is employed to expand the workman's opportunities and increase comfort and prosperity, and that is used to give more and more men work, at the same time reducing let me see that sort of capital, even under single control, is not a menace to humanity. So when capital does all of these things, this bringing prosperity to everyone, and he said, it is a working surplus held in trust and daily use for the benefit of all. The holder of such capital can scarcely regard it as a personal reward. No man can view this surplus as his own. Every workman was a partner in its creation. The owner's idea could have released the energy and the direction of the initiative, but it certainly did not supply all the energy and direction. The best wages ought to be paid. A proper living ought to be assured to every participant, no matter what his part is. A truly honest manufacturer holds his surplus profits in that trust. So this is the kind of thinking that Henry Ford has. And my picture of, I know Koen van Houten gave me another image for money, and he said, you have three kinds of money. You have cultural and gift money, which must be freely available. It's a gift. In other words, your taxes are a, shall we say, a gift that you're asked to pay, so that education, health, and the cultural sections and spirit and scientific research are freely available. Now, when I was a child, our education was free. We didn't pay for anything. We didn't pay for books or pencils or our lunches or our school fees. Everything was offered by the gift of the taxes. That is all changed now. Then there's another realm where you have purchasing money, where you can go into the store and you can buy something, and that is a kind of interaction with with money. So we'll just taking money as an example. Then there's another kind of money, and I was told the other day, never a lender or a borrower be. That which comes, of course, from Polonius, from Hamlet. But according to Koen van Houten, that the middle realm is the lending and the borrowing realm, which is actually the Christ realm, because you have interest in the one that you're lending money to. You don't charge him interest, you have interest in his work. So that you're enabling him to do something, and then your interest fructifies his work. And it is a very important thing to be able to lend and borrow. This was Koen's picture, which I like. I like that. So this is a very simplistic introduction from someone who really can't study this at the moment. And I'd love to hand it over to someone who can help.
So if anyone has something to contribute around the threefold social order, we'd love to, for you to put your hand up. There is the hand on Zoom, or just raise your hand if you got your video on. I know we've got Hannah. I don't know if you want to just share what you've written, or if I should read it out. Hannah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can read it. You can read it. I thought everybody could read it, but if you want to read it, you can read it.
The threefold social order also falls into the feeling, thinking, and willing spheres. So Dr. Steiner always refers back to the human being. So the sphere of feeling relates to education and religion, belief, etc. The realm of thinking.
Sorry, that's not true.
All right.
Sorry, can I just say that my understanding, and it's a long time since I read the threefold social order, I'm not an expert on it, but I understand that, you take this picture of the threefold human being, and the cultural spiritual sphere, which for Steiner consists of art, science, and religion, and education, and all that. That really has to do with the head, with the nerve sense system. And then on the opposite pole, so that's the resting head in the mantra, the foundation stone. And then on the other pole, you've got so that relates to the spirit world. And then on the opposite pole, the will metabolic pole, the limbs, relates to nature, to outer nature, which is the polarity of the spirit world. And that has to do with the economic sphere. And then in between, you've got the social sphere, which is also the legal judicial sphere. And that has to do with human rights and the laws that protect human rights. And so Steiner says that fundamentally, laws that we make, have to do with how people feel about things. Essentially, you can relate it to the feel. We feel that something is right, or we feel that it's wrong. And the role of the government, really, strictly speaking, should be restricted to looking after the sphere of human rights and to make sure that people are policed and to make sure that the social order, the beat of heart and lung, if you like, to ensure that that is held in its place. So it's an overreach for government to be involved in education or spiritual things. It's an overreach for government to control the economy. Because Steiner says that, if you take this maxim that was flourished around in the French Revolution, this cry, liberté, égalité, fraternité, which is sort of the cry on the ramparts in the French Revolution. Steiner said in that there's the archetype, freedom for the cultural sphere, liberty for the, liberty in the cultural sphere, and égalité, equality in the social realm, which is the heart realm, and then fraternity in the sphere of the economy. So you should be free in the economics. You should be free to do business with whoever you wish. This exchange of goods and services, this exchange of in the market should be a matter of, he says, brotherhood, of fraternity. In the sphere of human rights, very important that everybody is equal in that sphere. Doesn't mean people are equal in the cultural, spiritual sense, but they must be equal in the sphere of human rights. And in the cultural, spiritual sphere, it's very important that the law, that the judicial realm doesn't dictate also what we allow to teach our children and what they shouldn't. That should be left free to individuals to decide. So education and culture should be left free to take its own direction and according to its own spiritual principles. And it's very interesting, if you look at the aberration we're seeing in the world today, in the first world, you're seeing a huge overreach on the part of an elite of financial elite of billionaires who are controlling government and actually interfering not only in research, in medical research, in what should be the department of the cultural realm. They're overreaching and using their billions to influence the direction of culture and also to influence the direction of the economy, which should be free of that. If you look at the old Soviet Union, there you had an overreach on the part of the legal judicial sphere because they would control what you could be taught in schools. They would control who you have to do business with and everything. So you can get any one of these three realms can overreach itself and interfere with the relative autonomy and healthy functioning of the other two. So you see in the capitalist West, we've seen one kind of overreach, which is that the economic sphere, the profit motive, becomes the driving force that cripples the cultural, spiritual sphere and also cripples the human rights sphere. Whereas in the old Soviet Union and those communist countries, it was the overreach of government that crippled both the economic and the cultural, spiritual sphere. So if you take it on the analogy of the human body, that we are beings of nerve sense, we are beings of rhythmic heart and lung, respiratory rhythmic activity, and we're beings of the limb, of the metabolic system. These three systems are completely different from each other, and they function with relative autonomy in the human being, and yet the human being is one thing. But the idea is that we're evolving to a point now, and this has been happening, I think, progressively in the age of the consciousness soul, where we actually have to recognize that these three things shouldn't be muddled together, that they should be separated out, and in order to be brought together with a new kind of consciousness. anyway, that's enough. But I just thought as a picture of what the threefold social order is about. And it's very important to know that when Steiner was a young man, I can't tell you exactly, I haven't looked this up, but when he was living in Berlin, he used to give lectures to the workers right on the street. And he stood on the same podium as people like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who of course were famous communists in Germany at the time, I think in the 1920s or something like that, was it? The 1920s, I think. And he was giving speeches alongside these communists. But of course, he always wanted to be understood that the communism was one-sided and limited, because although we have to reach brotherhood, although we have to reach a just distribution of goods and resources in the society, we have to do so in a way that honors the principle of cultural freedom for the individual. And of course, that didn't really go down so well with the diehard socialists around him. But he nevertheless struggled at that time to make this principle, understood. And I think the threefold social order impulse comes out of that initiative of those early years of Steiner trying to meet the challenge of the time, the social challenge of the time. But I mean, it's interesting if you look at this initiation process that Steiner described for the individual, where when you cross the threshold, the three aspects of your being, your thinking, feeling, and willing, come apart when you cross the threshold. Your thinking and feeling come apart, and you have to strengthen yourself through meditative work to bring the three together again in a new and conscious way. So this is exactly analogous to what you're seeing in the threefold social order, that these three things have to be understood to now be separate things, but at the same time held in a healthy relationship through social work. Anyway, that's as I understood it when I read the book many years ago. But I'm sure I just think, what Noy was primarily talking about, I think, are economic principles for the healthy economy. But it helps to have a picture of the big picture of the threefold idea before you maybe get too deeply into the economic aspects of money and all that kind of, which I'm sure Martin would say lots about, because I know he's gone into the banking issue to some extent, haven't you, Martin?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Cyril, I think that's wonderful. You gave a beautiful, quick introduction about the whole thing. I would just like to add a practical aspect, because I mean, that's all now very well to understand the basics. You're 100% right with the overreach, all these things. But how does it affect our practical everyday life? I think that would be an interesting one from my point of view also. I think there is this middle realm question of the fair price and the fair remuneration. And I think that is what Steiner expected us. So when we buy anything in a shop, for example, that we ask ourselves, how was this product produced? Who was involved? And what did the people who were involved get a fair remuneration? Is it a fair price? And the fair price, or the fair remuneration, Steiner says, is we must always think, does this kind of price create enough income for this person to continue working in this realm? And that's the important one. So that is, I think, such an important thing. I often, when I go to a shop, and I often think that price is too low. These kind of prices are too low. And then, for example, when you buy this whole bunch of oranges these days, you buy a huge pack of 38 Rand or something like this. Then I just in my mind, I think, how does it break down? Okay, a major part of that goes to the shop, another part goes to the transport, and at the end of the day, it will probably be like 20 cents left for the picker of the oranges. You know what I mean? So Otto Steiner wanted us that we become conscious what part we as consumers play in this whole economic realm, basically, because of course, we know it from organic farming. That's this old question that people always come and say, the stuff is too expensive, biodynamic or organic products are too expensive. But the moment you start thinking about the production process, then you realize, wait a moment, how is this not organic food produced? So typically with machines and with monocultures and with pesticides and artificial fertilizers, all these kind of things. So it's a machine produced and substandard actually quality food, for example. So that we as customer have to understand that if you have an organic farm, for example, much more work goes into it. But this kind of work is a necessity if we want good quality food. So we must kind of appreciate in our mind, yes, there's so many people involved and they need to have fair income as well. So this whole thing of, he says, the moment we as a consumer go only for the cheapest, which we typically do, most people just buy, they go to Checkers, wherever, where the things are cheapest. And he says the moment we do that, we become capitalists ourselves, capitalist exploiters, basically, because we basically take advantage of somebody else who doesn't get a fair remuneration. And I think, to me, that's where all the other things are very important, which Cyril talked about. But I think, to me, that is where the whole thing starts on our personal level. That when Rudolf Steiner, when Waldorf Astoria, the factory which introduced the Waldorf school in the beginning, Stein introduced their classes for the workers, where all the workers had to learn where the tobacco came from. They learned about, it came from Turkey, about the conditions of farm workers in Turkey who planted tobacco. Then they taught about who's smoking these cigarettes, and they put not mantras, but spiritual text into these little cigarette packets, which is sent to the front. So he cultivated an interest in the worker to see the big picture also, so that if you stand in a production line and just pack maybe tobacco into cigarettes and this kind of thing, whatever exactly, that you have an idea where your place in the whole system is, and where it starts, where the tobacco is planted, how the conditions are there, how it is transported, does it come by ship, does it come, today we would say by plane, how much transport is involved, how much environmental damage is involved by just transporting it around the globe. So this kind of consciousness, and I think, to me, one of the amazing things is that we have, I don't know how familiar you are in South Africa with it, but in Germany and Europe, there's this fair trade organizations. They get a label on products which say fair trade, stamped. And I think that's a marvelous initiative which goes exactly in this direction, that you buy chocolate which has a label fair trade. So you know the people who planted cocoa and harvested and the farmers got a fair deal. They were not exploited by big business and so on. So maybe just as adding to Cyril's, this practical aspect, how we in everyday life can become conscious of the processes which bring the things to our table and to the shop, and what happens afterwards with also recycling. All these things goes in the same direction, that we create in our mind the whole picture of the production process. And everybody of us can do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. We just got a few more minutes around this topic, but I'd love to just relate it back to the foundation stone. I'm just asking that question because it's see the economy and how we spend our money and understanding all of that, as well as the political and the social. So I'm going to go back to Grant. Yes, I can see you waving. Just briefly help us out. Yeah.
Hello, Telana. Yes. I'd just like to follow a thought process of Rudolf Steiner. Basically, we have already in the world a very big duality, namely good and evil. We are the good guys and we're fighting the evil guys. And but Rudolf Steiner talks about how in our human nature, we are under two influences. The one influence is to really take us right down into materialism and perhaps make us even think of ourselves as machines, or trying to create everything and in a machine-like way. The other influence is to make us full of fantasy that goes past reality and lifts us away so that we, in a dreamlike state, we want to actually leave the realities of the earth. And he gives these two influences. He gives them the names of Ahriman, who would take us right into materialism, and Lucifer, who would take us out of the earth. So he gives these two names. And if one falls completely for the one, in medical terms, one would become totally sclerotic. And in the other, one would become totally overcome with fever. And now he points to the fact that you can't look at evil as one entity which is against all the good. But it is up to us, and with the help of the Christ impulse, to keep the balance between these two. And this is where we go from two-folding to three-folding. And he points also to the poet Milton in his Paradise Lost, where he says Milton actually describes paradise. What he describes is actually a Luciferic realm. And it looks like he's got the good and the evil, but he's got the Luciferic realm there. And even Goethe in his Faust, with his Mephisto, he doesn't, I don't know if he confuses, but he brings the two polar forces together in Mephisto. And it's very important for us to be able to change our thinking from two-folding to three-folding, and everywhere to try and keep this balance. One can ask oneself, after the First World War, why didn't Rudolf Steiner just say, thank goodness it's over? And because his book, which is translated, the title as The Threefold Social Order, actually was in 1919. And he said, this is not a world war, and this is only the beginning. And in 30 years' time, if we don't change our thinking, Europe will be in a complete mess. And you look 30 years on from 1919, and you get towards the end of the Second World War. The title, the actual German title, was The Core Points of the Social Question. And so he said also that this book, it won't please anybody, because so much has to change in our thinking. And that if that thinking doesn't change, then, then we're going downwards. And I think the book is very difficult to read, and one has to work. He said that with the book Philosophy of Freedom, you can find your freedom, but with the threefold social order, then you can create a vessel for this freedom. So that goes definitely into all the things that we've been discussing now, but that's just another perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. So what I'm hearing is like from our discussions around the foundation stone, there's the threefoldness that's within that verse, but then practically it translates into how we engage with each other as human beings, and through like the threefold social order ideas, then becomes like really the living of what we learn from the verse. Estelle, I think you...
Can I ask a question quickly?
Sure, and then we'll go to Estelle.
Okay.
Well, it's just a question as well, because...
Sorry, Anne.
an event has happened in my life which has become like a threefold social order in a way. And that is that through all my masses and masses and masses of puppet shows that I've done to nearly 1 million children, I've accumulated a certain amount of money. And it's been really morally done and joyously done. And then somebody has been, you can say, someone I really trusted and is trusted by a lot of people, and was my financial advisor for about 16 years or something, has vanished out of the country and taken all my money with, and all the money of quite a couple of other people as well. So that is, you know, then I'm left with nothing, but I've got to cope with this. And then how do I cope with it in a threefold way? Well, fortunately, I've got that kind of nature where it hasn't affected me that much. I mean, to be without a cent is another thing. But trying to look at it positively, I've also managed to keep, I thought, shall I keep contact with this person, which I can do on my cell phone. And he's in the Himalayas somewhere. And he won't come back because he's just vanished with everybody's money, you see. So it's a threefoldness within the human being. How does one cope with this situation? It has to do with money. The money is gone. One is left with one's ego strength. And then you've still got to create something positively, hopefully, for this person who has vanished in the future. I don't know what's going to happen to him or whatever. So, I mean, this threefoldness to do with finance, I feel also has to be coped with, hopefully in the proper spiritual way, by the individual.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, Estelle, for sharing. Yes, very much. Annalisa?
Well, I'm not sure that it's connected with what you've said, Estelle, but I've recently been quite interested in the Declaration of Independence of America. Maybe Loanne can tell us a bit more about that. And there's this word unalienable right. And I was thinking about this unalienable right, which is a right which cannot be taken away from you, and it can also not be given away. And that there's this difference between an unalienable right and a human right. So I'm just interested that we don't get those two confused, and we have an unalienable right to create, to love, and the pursuit of happiness, as it said in the American Declaration of Independence. So I'm just interested relative to the Foundation Stone meditation, Soul of Man, that you have these spiritual aspects, but you've also got practical aspects. So anyway, that's just some of my unfinished thinking around these things.
Mm. Thank you.
So I'd like to know if there's anything more burning around the threefold social order. Otherwise, I'd love to start to hear also from anyone who would like to share what you have taken away from this journey. I shared some of my highlights, as Noya asked me about what I got from these 7 sessions. So we'd love to hear from you as well, as a way for us to start to summarize and close for this conference, these wonderful 7 weeks. What are you taking away? How has this Foundation Stone exploration and anthroposophy enriched your life? And how can you imagine sharing these riches with others? So if there's anyone who would like to share what their takeaway is, something that stood out for them, something that they learned that's new, you can put up your hand, or just if you go to your video and just wave so I can see you. But I'd love to hear any other comments around the threefold social order and how it, connects to what we've been learning in the foundation stone. Was there anyone that would like to share what they're taking from this last few weeks? Because we're going to be like ending off soon, or definitely ending off the recording part, but yeah, so just to pause if there's anyone who wants to share something else that they're taking with them. John, do you have anything?
Maybe
Yes.
I could
go.
try my hand. I came across the foundation stone verse on meditation many years ago, and I thought it was very lovely and very powerful. And it was read the whole way through on a few occasions at the meetings I was at. But and then I dropped it, and then I came back recently to it, and to discover that these different translations. And I was saying, now what is all this about? Because this doesn't help me. And let's see if we can make it into a simple translation, which is the one where all the words are easy to understand and grasp. And then I came across an article in the New View edition of spring 2013, and it's a morning meditation by Matthew Barton, and I found it absolutely fascinating, because for the first time I heard anybody trying to give a definition between a mantric verse and a poetry verse, right? And in reading this article, I find that, wow, I haven't actually looked at the idea of what a mantric verse actually is. And it would be interesting to hear what others who have been dealing with mantric verses know about them. But the point he makes is that the mantric verse tries to get at the feeling behind the words, paints in sounds what the feeling is. And so in other words, the mantric verse makes use of alliteration and onomatopoeia and metaphors and so forth, right? That need to be, I think, conscious in the eyes of the person who is reading it. Now, therefore, and that most of the sort of understandings come from the language in which the poem or the mantric verse is actually written in. In this case, it's German. And I think unless we have the German beside us, even if we don't understand German, that's the point. Even if we don't understand it, we can still see what these vowels and consonants are actually saying to us. So maybe that might help us to it certainly will help me anyway. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I know in Ludmilla's group, they always read a section of the verse and she reads it in German. Someone else reads the same section in English. I think just for that reason, so that you hear it in both languages. Anyone else? Yes.
This article by Barton, I think, opens for me anyway a new picture, a new way of looking at the foundation stone verse. Mm. And if anyone would like a copy of it, I can send it to them by email, or send it to you, and then you can send it on to Lana. Yes.
Yes, we can do that. Thank you, John. Is there anyone else who'd like to share what they're taking away? What has been a highlight in your learning? Yes?
Wilfred's got his hand up.
Just one word that comes back to me all the time, and it's that invocation to practice. And I live with that thought and the scale or the implications of this call on me to practice. And in one sense, it's what John refers to, namely it's a mantra. So it's one can practice the verse in a mantric, in a meditative sense, but it's also maybe relating more in the direction of the threefold social order, to practice it practically. Yeah, not only in refined moments, but for me to practice it in the way I just relate to anything in the world. To me, that is an interesting question that I live with now, namely, how do I practice this? Meditatively, but otherwise as well. Mm-hmm. And I think, give me 10 years and I'll give you the answer. Thank you very much.
I think we need to reconvene in 10 years for a few of us. Lola, did you have something to share?
Yes. Can you hear me, Telana?
Yes, go.
Well, firstly, thank you very much. Every session was very rich and valuable, and I've appreciated a lot. I've actually been partial to Daisy Alden's translation, which I downloaded from the RS archives years ago, and that was enough for me. I just found it, the poetic rhythm of it, I've loved to work with that, but I haven't worked with it as diligently. I've just loved it as the sound, and it's re-enlivened it for me, these sessions. And one thing that stood out a lot, which many people have said, and which you know, going back to it has really almost like a clarion call, has been the words, and you will truly think. What is thinking? If what have I been doing? If I think I'm thinking, and you will truly think, and you will truly feel, and you will truly live. This is what has sparked my enthusiasm to actually discover what is it to truly think, what is it to truly feel, what is it to truly live. And every one of those sessions has actually awakened that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lola. It's wonderful to hear. Is there anyone else that would like to share? Our speakers that we've been interviewing, we'd love to also hear from you what you gained from sharing, if there's anything.
Can I just, till somebody comes in, the society in the Netherlands is preparing a publication of the translation of the Foundation Stone Meditation in all languages around the world where it is actually being used. So don't just translations for the sake of translations, but translations that are practiced in all continents. So I think that we can look forward to that. I think it will only be next year that it will come out. They're working on it, but that's something to look forward to. And Afrikaans is certainly in there. It's a translation by Gillian de Villiers is included in that.
Wonderful.
Thank you. This is any other comments? Otherwise, I will wrap up the recording part.
I would just like to thank absolutely everyone for this positive, wonderful community that we've built together in the last 7 weeks. It's gone way beyond anything I could have dreamed of. So I'm just very, very grateful for everybody's input. Thank you.
Thank you, Noy. Thank you, Telana.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. And I'd love to take you back to 1923 as we end off, when all those people were going up that walk up the hill to that wooden structure in the freezing, freezing cold. And we're sitting there with Rudolf Steiner at the rebuilding of the society, and heard this verse for the first time. And just as we loop back, because that's where we started 7 weeks ago, just to be sitting there in that wooden structure, freezing cold, with a number of other souls that were all seeking and listening to Rudolf Steiner as he uncovered and shared this verse with them, and now with us through these 7 weeks. I do also want to thank you, and with that image, as I'm sure they did at the end of that conference, they took it with them into their day-to-day lives. And I hope that you can take what you gained from this, the riches that you managed to accumulate through this journey with us, into your days, into your spheres, into your lives. And we hope to see you again soon as we touch base again and explore in other avenues, other ways, the foundation stone again.
Thank you.